Alright, so now it's time to finish off this image. I'm going to very carefully pull this back because this glue was there to guide the upper alignment, and now I need to add the lowest layers that go in between. And this is one of the more complicated parts of this process, is making sure that you have everything lining up when you're going in between layers. I want to go a little bit higher with that, and this is where you can cut things that will be invisible in order to make the image fit how you want. So now I'm tripling up that pattern of concentric rings to go back to the original format, but I think what I'm going to do is go just a little bit lower with this. To get the full effect of the bottom section. And you can just keep moving back and forth using that little bit of leftover glue to give yourself a bit more room to adjust. This, I think, if I do one more move, that splits up there, but it gets covered at the bottom. That's where I'm going to make this one line up. To do that, I will now apply to my second layer, and this glue stick is about to run out. You can go thicker in on some spots, and then layer by layer, once again, you just slowly build up to the bottom. And when you're working with really detailed layers like this, sometimes you do end up going through a lot of glue. Now I'm going to add a little bit more to reinforce where I already had the original glue, just to make sure it didn't get worn out too much by taking it off and putting it back on. Now I want to start using these pieces to match the size of the other corner. I'm trying to build in similar patterns and shapes because this composition is very even overall in shape, so I don't want to go too far away. And that, I think, with the arc going there, I think needs to go underneath, and definitely not yellow. But this is, again, we need to get this pretty precise, and then we pull off the top. And finally decide where we want everything to fit. I think that is right about where I want to be. This can come out a little bit more. But I also want to bring it a little bit higher. And I may need to adjust it for it to fit in well. I think, though, it's better to get rid of that green, tuck it in farther, and move everything closer. That way I still get that shape, I still get the pattern underneath. I get this effect where it opens up briefly, and now I have that same small figure that I was adding earlier. So now that I have everything where I want it, now I hold this side down, lift off, and go through the same process. Because that is the first element, I want to make sure I anchor it down in place. Have to double check because that's better than having to start over. So I have a little bit of glue on there, and that allows me to start this process. I've decided where I want it to line up, and now I can add the extra glue to the points that I did not attach it to already and continue the process. I'm sure this part isn't the most exciting, but I hope this gives you an idea of the patience you need to do detail, because this is the smaller end of the work I do now. And to me, that's a lot of what's interesting about taking this serious as an art, is being able to invest the time into making what I want in the most interesting way possible. So now I'm going to go ahead and start building down, because each element is in the correct order now. So if I build down, I will always be going one step closer to the finish line, and eventually, after I get everything glued, I will add a backing to this. And the backing is where I complete the structure so that it holds up and isn't so kind of flimsy and bent. The bending is from the glue, so I want to make sure that when I'm finished, there's something behind it to keep it flat, so that it looks good, not just when I'm starting it, but until I don't like the image anymore at all, until it's an entirely new thing. I don't have to worry about anything changing. The only thing that can change is what I do in the future. So if I've got this to a point now that is interesting, then I can always go farther because I'm just adding on to my skills. This piece is interesting as well because that doesn't all perfectly line up, so I have to estimate. I'm using my fingers to give me an idea where I need to glue. Those are my outer boundaries, and then I kind of trace what the shape was in between my fingers, and that's another way to build up an image when you can't have it all in one place at one time, because you have to build it up. I've got just one more piece, and then this is ready to have a backing. And because this is thin, I'm going to do my preferred method for thin strips, which is to, again, just push them across the top of my glue stick. Make sure it's an even coat and it sticks on all portions of the piece, because when you've got a thin piece, any part of it without glue will flop off and be likely to cause a tear. And tears are very hard to deal with in collages. If something tears, you really have to be careful to make sure that that tear doesn't show up in the final product. This I want in a little bit closer. This I want up just a little bit higher. And that'll add a little bit more glue too. This gets a dot on top to keep it connected, and this up here is going to get a little bit extra, and because I left this loose, I can bend it just slightly so that it matches up with the angle there, and then I just have to wipe the crease down as much as I can. So now I've got what my final image is, and so the last thing that I need to do is add a backing to it, and that's where I use cardstock. Cardstock is much heavier paper, so it allows the image to be much more secure. Now, the parts of this, because this is a little bit larger than the cardstock I have, I want to make sure that I have room for everything. So I'm going to glue it on top where only those tiny little bits pop out, and then we're going to cut out everything that's left until it has a complete backing. I want to try this out for just a moment because I like the way adding a little bit more red balances things out. But I don't like that color. So what I will do is try it with just an arc. There we go. See how it evens out that? That's what seemed like it was missing, was a way to balance out, because right now this side is too bright compared to that side. We have the white and the gray here to balance that out, but there's this huge bright spot right here, and adding a little bit more red to it is a really good way to spread it out. And because there's already a border there with a darker portion, we don't have to worry about that being a problem. Notice how this is coming up a little bit, or it might not be clear on camera, but it is. How I fix something like that is to put a little bit of glue on the knife again and wipe it in, and that keeps everything lined up. Alright, now I'm going to start with the entire collage upside down. And honestly, I like looking at collages upside down because they're also kind of their own collages. This is all blue now, and there's white patches. Again, it shows that you don't need perfect images to make something interesting. This is not as good as what's on the front. You could add pieces here to make it more interesting, but the point is shapes and colors are often just as interesting as images. Again, always start with your border because that needs to be the most well applied, and then build your way in, understanding that you're going to spread that out as you apply it to the backing. If you don't have cardstock or just don't want to have a blank image around it, what we'll do next is explore collaging with backgrounds as the base, but using a background requires that you think a lot more carefully about the colors in the image that are already there. You can't choose quite as much as you can choose like this, because you have to work within the picture that you started with. Now, I'm going to start flattening everything as much as I can, get it all connected. And right now it looks a little bit weird because the cardstock isn't aligned with it right now, and that's something that you have to be aware of, that it's not going to look absolutely perfect. And there's an example of being careful as you're gluing, because once you get enough layers they will rip, and you have to be very careful and repair those rips if they happen. They don't always happen, but you have to be prepared for them if you're going to work with paper, because paper is fragile like that. Now, once again, I'm adding glue underneath because I don't like how much it's connected right here. And that will allow me to finish connecting it all. And now I'm going to clean the glue off, always rubbing against the direction away from the blade. And after that, I'm going to switch to a new blade in order to cut out the inner shapes. The outer shapes I'm going to use scissors for, because that wider shape is easier to do in a slower process. Inside shapes where you're cutting holes out, those are very hard to do with scissors and often will damage the collage that you're working on. So you want to know where different tools work best and how they should be used together to make sure that the whole image comes out fine. So notice anything that I want to be see-through, I'm cutting completely out of the cardstock. And I can adjust the lines if I'm missing. Always cut short and fix it by then worrying about cutting too much and accidentally going through your collage. I use the knife for the detail work because I can move much faster for small areas. I think this and that will be the last parts I use the knife for. And notice little bits will come off occasionally if you get too close. Again, that's part of the technique, is making sure you're giving yourself just enough room to cut around without damaging anything on the inside. That I went wide, so I'm going closer now. Again, cutting down. And then I'm going to finish up this side. Finish up this side. And then I'll cut around the top with scissors and show you what the final picture looks like. That I don't want any extra to show, so I will cut a little bit farther in. And you just want to test that you cut all the way through when you get to these detailed parts, because that can rip, and if you've glued it on properly, it can rip your collage. Now, these longer cuts I think will be easier to follow with the scissors, because I can just make sure that I'm cutting everything on the same line instead of bending the outside. Again, you want to test everything, make sure that you've separated it before you go on to the next part. Checking all of it and going now through the top. Alright, I'm going to put it sideways now that it's finished, so you can see the full image on the screen. But that's where that one finishes. Just have to add one last cut, and that one's done.